You know that feeling, right? When you're just so overwhelmed, so frustrated that you feel like you just have to scream. It's this deep, primal instinct, the idea that if you just let it all out, you'll feel better. But what if that release? What if it's actually a trap? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating perspective that turns this whole idea on its head and offers a pretty surprising alternative. So let's get right to it. When that pressure is building up and you feel like you're about to pop, does letting out a huge scream actually help? Does it solve anything in the long run? The source material we're looking at today has a pretty counterintuitive answer to that, suggesting this go-to coping mechanism might be doing more harm than good. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about that universal feeling of frustration. Then we'll get into why shouting feels so darn good in the moment. After that, we hit the core problem, the emptiness it leaves behind. From there, we'll explore the source's alternative for filling that void. And finally, a really specific, kind of weird way to share this idea with other people. So our journey kicks off with a story from the source material, a real-world example. It's about a retired nursery director who, despite a long, faithful life, feels this constant, deep, stifling frustration. The Korean word for it is dupduphum. It's like being stuck in a box. And the only place she ever feels any relief is at these prayer retreats, where shouting is actually part of the whole experience. And her story, well, it's pretty much all of our stories, isn't it? When that internal pressure cooker is about to blow its lid, we look for a place to let it out. For you, maybe it's screaming in your car, or going for a hike in the mountains just to yell at the sky, or even booking a private karaoke room. That urge to shout is just a fundamentally human thing. So this brings us to the obvious question. If we all do it, there's got to be a reason, right? Why does that big, primal scream feel so good, so cathartic even, if it's just for a second? Okay, now this is where the source's explanation gets really interesting. It says that when you shout, it's a literal physical expulsion. All that pent-up junk, all the stress and frustration that's been weighing on you, it physically bursts out of your body. That's why you get that instant feeling of relief, that hyurenhada, or refreshing sensation. And the source doesn't argue with that feeling at all. It totally acknowledges that immediate release. You scream, you feel lighter. For a moment, the weight is just gone. But just when you think, great, problem solved, the source hits us with a major plot twist. And here it is, the question that changes the whole game. Is this a real lasting solution? Or is it just a band-aid? A quick fix that doesn't actually fix anything at all? This leads us right to the heart of the whole argument, what the source calls the problem with emptiness. Because when you force all of that energy out, you create a vacuum. And well, as we know, nature can't stand a vacuum. The source basically says we're mislabeling that post-scream feeling. It's not just relief. It's actually a feeling of being hewada, which means hollow or empty. You've cleared the space, sure, but now there's just nothing there. You've created a void right inside yourself. So what fills that void? This is where a really key concept comes into play, soggy. The source defines this as a kind of murky, negative, low-quality energy. And just like air rushing into an empty bottle, this soggy is naturally drawn to any empty space it can find, including the one you just made inside you. And there's a brilliant, simple analogy for this. Think about an empty room. If you clear everything out but then just leave the door open, what happens? Dust blows in, bugs move in, unwanted stuff starts to fill it up. The sources says the exact same thing happens in our inner spiritual world. And this, right here, is the light bulb moment. That rush of negative, soggy energy is exactly why the relief from shouting is so short-lived. The frustration always comes back, and sometimes it's even worse than before, because you've just swapped one problem for another. You end up trapped in this miserable cycle. Feel frustrated, shout it out, feel empty, fill up with more negative energy, and then you're right back where you started. So if blasting the bad energy out just opens the door for more bad energy to come in, what's the alternative? Well, the source suggests a totally different approach. Not expulsion, but displacement. To displace the bad stuff, you need something better. This is what the source calls high-quality energy. And you don't create this energy, you absorb it. You get it by engaging with profound knowledge. Like reading a really insightful book, listening to a great lecture, or having a deep conversation that just clicks. It's that feeling of clarity and focus you get from learning something meaningful. Now, here's the beautiful, simple logic of it all. You don't actually have to fight the bad energy. You don't have to force it out. When you bring in something of a higher quality, a higher mass, it just naturally takes up space. And the low quality, murky energy, it just gets crowded out. It's displaced. It has nowhere else to go. So let's just put these two side by side. You've got the shouting method. The action is force. The result is avoid. The consequence is that negative soggy rushes in, and the outcome is a temporary fix that just leads to a cycle. Then you've got this Jungbub method, as the source calls it. The action is addition. You add high-quality energy. The result? No void. The consequence is that soggy is displaced, and the outcome is a fundamental, lasting solution. It's a pretty stark difference. Okay, so let's say this idea clicks with you. Now, how do you share it with someone you care about who's struggling, like that nursery director? Well, get ready, because the source has a very specific and honestly kind of unusual set of instructions for this.
It's a whole 4-step process. First, and this is a big one, do not just send them a link to a YouTube video. The source says that visuals, comments, all that stuff can create prejudice. Instead, step 2, send an audio-only file. Step 3, and this is the really clever part, don't tell them this will help you. Instead, you make it a request for your benefit. You say something like, hey, could you do me a favor and listen to this? I need someone to inspect it for me and tell me what they think. And finally, step 4, if they say no, you drop it. You just let them be.
So what in the world is the logic behind this strange method? Well, the source claims that the simple act of listening, even if it's just to inspect it for you, is what actually does the work. The high-quality energy from the lecture itself starts to enter their system and begins to displace that negative, frustrating energy. Whether they're consciously buying into the philosophy or not, it works on a different level. So, when you boil it all down, the core takeaway from all of this is a massive strategic shift. We stop trying to deal with our internal problems by violently emptying ourselves out. Instead, we move toward the much gentler, more sustainable act of filling ourselves with something better. And that leaves us with one final, big question to think about. Whether we're talking about frustration, or bad habits, or just negative thoughts, what if the best way to get rid of the bad stuff in our lives isn't to fight it and kick it out the door? What if it's just to focus all our energy on bringing in the good and just letting the good quietly and calmly push the bad away?